maneuvers were chaotic. Flight crew struggled frantically to refuel and rearm their aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes lay everywhere, and there was no time to follow safety procedures. And unknown to the Japanese, who had no radar, the first American torpedo bombers were only 3 minutes away. The American air group from Task Force 16 had followed a course based on the assumption that the Japanese fleet had carried on sailing towards Midway. Instead, Nagumo had changed course. As a result, most of the dive bombers and fighters from Hornet, 45 aircraft in all, failed to find the enemy. A second group of Hornet's aircraft had also, at first, missed Nagumo's fleet, but had then turned north and within minutes had found the Japanese carriers. The first target for Hornet's torpedo bombers was Akagi. As the squadron swept in at low level, the Zeros pounced. The few Americans that survived were torn apart by the fleet's anti-aircraft fire. Not one torpedo bomber and only one pilot survived. Within minutes of the first raid, torpedo bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown began their attack. Once again, the American pilots were slaughtered, and no enemy ships were hit. Only 6 raiders survived. With the torpedo attacks beaten off and his fleet still unscathed, Nagumo was at last ready to send his waiting strike aircraft against the American carriers. Just as the launch signal was about to be given, American dive bombers, which had been lurking high in the clouds, pounced on the carriers. The first victim was Kaga. The time was 10:20 hours. The first bomb to strike Kaga landed on the rear of her flight deck, squarely amongst aircraft, armed and waiting to take off. 2 more hit near her forward elevator. Another exploded in the hangar below, igniting fuel and detonating bombs. Kaga was left a raging inferno within minutes, and almost everyone on her bridge was killed. As Kaga burned, Akagi was launching its first Zero fighter for the attack that was supposed to smash the American fleet. At that moment, 3 dauntless dive bombers struck. The first hit on Akagi landed near her midships lift and exploded in the hangar. The next fell amongst the parked aircraft on her deck. Fuel and bombs ignited immediately, killing the elite of the Japanese air fleet in their cockpits. Within minutes, the fire had spread forward, and Admiral Nagumo's flagship was doomed. The next victim of the American dive bombers was Soryu. Just after 10:25, 3 bombs smashed into the carrier's flight deck. The first bomb fell between Soryu's second and third lifts. the next landed in front of the forward lift and penetrated to the hangar, detonating bombs, torpedoes, and fuel. The third struck on the rear deck, completely destroying her waiting strike wave. In the space of 5 minutes, the mightiest carrier fleet in existence had been shattered. Admiral Nagumo, his flagship blazing, was forced to transfer his flag to a cruiser. Of his once magnificent carrier force, only Hiryu was left, and immediately the order was given to launch her strike aircraft. There was still some hope that even now, a devastating blow could be visited on the American enemy. The first wave of Hiryu's strike force was made up of 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters. Their target was Task Force 17 and the carrier Yorktown. Shortly before noon, the Vals were detected by Yorktown's radar. Already, 12 Wildcat fighters were in the air covering the carrier, and another 15 were on deck refueling. These were ordered to launch at once. At the same time, Yorktown's aviation gas lines were shut down, and her fire suppression system was activated. The Japanese strike wave, approaching at 10,000 feet, ran straight into Yorktown's fighter defenses. 10 were shot down by the Wildcats. The 14 survivors headed straight for the American carrier. Five Vals survived the gauntlet of Wildcats and the hail of fire put up by Yorktown and her escorts. 3 bombs plunged into Fletcher's flagship. The first bomb struck Yorktown's flight deck and exploded. The second penetrated and burst below the funnel, damaging all but one of the ship's boilers and destroying her radar room. The third bomb crashed through Yorktown's number 1 elevator and deep into her hangar. In spite of being hit by 3 bombs, so good was Yorktown's damage control that potentially catastrophic fires were quickly put out. No fuel or magazines exploded, and amazingly, Yorktown was steaming at 20 knots and able to recover and relaunch her fighters within 1 hour and 40 minutes of the attack. By now, the surviving Japanese carrier, Hiryu, had launched her second wave, a scratch force of 10 Kate torpedo bombers and 6 Zero fighters. Once again, American Wildcats savaged the raiders, but 9 torpedo bombers survived and swept into the attack. Because Yorktown was no longer belching smoke, she was mistaken for one of her unscathed sister ships. Although 5 more Kates were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire, 4 launched their torpedoes. Yorktown was hit twice on the port side, and one of the raiders deliberately crashed onto her deck. Within seconds of the strike, Yorktown was racked by explosions and began to list to port. At 1500 hours, the order was given to abandon ship. As the first of Yorktown's crew